Good.
I brought some notes. I have an hour and a half worth of notes, so I just don't want to miss anything so important that I wrote down, right? Hi, my name is Kim Seebach. I have not had a sex change. That's my real name. And I was born at a time when there was a book by Rudyard Kipling by the name of Kim. And it was a book about a little English boy or Irish boy in India, and he had all these adventures. And my dad said, if you have half the adventures of this little boy, you're going to have a great life. And so that kind of started my story from wee little about how I wanted to live my life. I wanted it to be full of adventure, right? And I can honestly say my life has been full of adventure. I want you to think back 25 years. Where were you this week 25 years ago? Now, some of you weren't born. That's okay. But where were you 25 years ago this week? I was living on the corner or near the corner of Grape and 114th Street, right across from a housing project. And I was huddled in that house for 2 days because the community around me was going crazy, and there's National Guard coming down with mini tanks and walking down the street in a small community called Watts. And that's part of my story. I was there at the time as an inner city missionary, working with people in Watts and helping them to find Jesus and to plant a church and get their lives on track. But that's just a part of my story. My name is Kim. I'm a sinner. That's who I am. I'm a sinner. I'm completely forgiven. I'm saved. I am redeemed. I'm set apart. And I love Jesus. But that's what I am. That's really all I am. But I have a story, and I want to talk today about the power of yours and my story. Right? And we all have them. But what makes them powerful? I'm not a very good storyteller. Marty's much better storyteller than me. I like to kind of cut to the chase. I don't, if I would have really done the story about being in Watts, I could have, the bullets going by and the sound of the sirens, that's not me, right? But my story is still powerful, regardless of how well I can describe it. So this past week, we celebrated one of the most powerful stories in all of history, the Easter story, right? That story told over and over throughout the decades, throughout the world, has transformed the world. It's a powerful story. It has all the elements of a great story. It has violence, it has intrigue, it has conspiracy, it has miracles, it has unnatural happenings, right? It's a powerful story because of what, though? Because it's true. It really happened. And the person it talks about is the creator of the world. Creator of the world. The first and the last. The one through whom all things have been made. For whom all things have been made. And that's Jesus, right? And Jesus made that story powerful because it was what he did in redemption for all of us. So I want you to think back right now. Not think back. I want you to think about stories in the Bible, because the Bible is the best storytelling book in the world, right? And I'm going to say some things, and you tell me what the story is, okay? So, in the beginning is the story of what? There you go. Let my people go. Story of Exodus. King David. Could be lunch. David and Goliath. Bathsheba. Yes, the story of our male weaknesses. Samson. Delilah. We know that one. Mary and Joseph. Christmas. John the Baptist. Locusts. Herod, right? Apostle Paul. Road to Damascus, right? Right? Small things bring a huge story out. So what's the thing in all of these guys that makes the story powerful? So if we take a look at all those characters, some were very educated, some were slaves, some were just horny guys, some were, what else do we? Warriors, some were philosophers, some were religious zealots, right? The stories of the people in the Bible were ordinary guys, just like you and me. Ordinary guys, living out their lives the best they could in the situation that they were, right? Some had jobs, some didn't have jobs, right? Some had good marriages, some didn't have any marriages. Some had bad marriages, right? That wasn't what made their stories powerful. What made their stories powerful was that God was participating with them in their lives every step of the way. Ordinary guys, just like you and me, with a powerful God that was there with them and participating with them. So when we look at the power of our story, the power is really about how God and us are interacting together in this story that we call life. And in this life, what will we have? What will we have in this life? Many troubles, right? We will have many troubles. How many of you have not had a trouble? Right? I mean, I really did think when I first became a Christian that, wow, it's just going to be dandy now, right? When I first met Jesus, because he's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's with me, and I'm just going to kind of zoom into all that he has for me. But the reality is, in this world, we'll have troubles. But the power of our story in that is Jesus with us and what he's doing in our lives. So I want to tell you my story, and I want to talk about some parts of it and it's my story. It's not going to be your story. Your story doesn't have to be like mine. In fact, it can't be like mine. Because this is the story of me and Jesus. And the story of me and Jesus started way before I knew him, right? I grew up on a little farm in Saskatchewan, Canada, on a wheat farm. When I grew up, we didn't have running water in there. We had to haul water in from town, and we had to pump it up into the sink and into the bathtub. And I remember the first day we actually did get a flush toilet. Dad had built a big pit out there and ran a tank, and I took the first dump in there and ran out and saw it actually land in the pit out there. It was great, right? And you know, I mean, this was back in the 50s, right? In the late 50s. It's my story. I got to tell it. Okay, so, you know, I remember, you know, we had an outhouse and we had a 5-gallon pail in the basement with a toilet lid on it in the wintertime, you know, when it's 20 below. I mean, that's just my story. I thought that was normal, right? You guys might be saying, oh, well, some of you might be saying, well, that's kind of weird. But that was my story. That was normal life for me. My dad died when I was 9, and we moved into the big town of Moose Jaw, right? About 30,000 people. And I knew about Jesus. We went to church once in a while, right? But it wasn't until I moved away. In our family, the kids all moved out when they were 18, so we moved out, and I was a typical pot-smoking, beer-drinking kid, right? And I went out. I had my 53 Pontiac, and I drove out, got a job at a bank near an Indian reservation in southern Alberta, and didn't have anything to do. So one night, I drove around, and I drove to the church that I knew about, and asked the pastor, I said, hey, do you mind if I use your piano once in a while? You know, I'm tired of just going to the bar and hanging out. And he said, well, you know, we can't just let anybody use the piano. I'm going to have to take this to the board and see if the board will let you play the piano. I said, okay, forget you. And I drove around town, and I saw this little church with the light on, and I stopped in, and I said, you know, is the pastor, the priest around? I'm new in town, and I just wondering if I could use your piano once in a while. And this young couple was there, and they said, well, you know, he's not here, but let me take you up to his house. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. So we drove up. It was winter, and I drove up to his house. He had company in, and he says, come on in. And he sat there and chatted with me for a couple hours and invited me to their Thanksgiving service and dinner the next week. And I got to know this young couple, and they got me into a little Bible study with them. And you know, I said, no, I'm a Christian, you know, and yeah, that's all good stuff. And this went on for a little bit, a couple months, and so one night I was at church and I was actually playing the piano, right? I'm sitting in this little church, and I'm sitting at the bench and I'm playing, I make a mistake and I cuss. I said, And I heard a noise in the back of the church. I thought, oh crap. Some little old church lady heard me cuss in church, and now I'm really going to get it, right? I was 18 years old, right? But who was there was God. And sitting at that bench, I finally knew Jesus was real. And I sat there, and it was like I could see, you talk about visions and you talk about seeing things, but all I knew was at the end of the road I was envisioning was disaster. And I can think of it now as hell, but it was like, oh. And I was struck with this sense of, what do I do? What do I do? And that was my thought. What should I do? And the only words that came into my mind, whether audible or not, from God was, believe in Jesus. Believe in Jesus. And so right there at that bench, I just said, I believe in you. I knew he was real. I mean, the church was filled with the presence of God, right? It just was. And there was no doubt in mind, it was really about, the excitement was, he is really real, right? What I thought about was actually real, and this person was real. And so at that bench, I did, and then, good old human nature, I thought, well, how do I know this is real, right? How do I know? And I said, God, confirm in me or do something, but how do I know this was real? And at that moment, I was filled with this bubbling energy from my toes to my head, and I got up on the platform and I was jumping, and I don't know how to praise God. I never praised God before in my life, and I was jumping and praising God. I'm a Christian, right? I don't even do that now, right? That's not in my nature, that's not my normal nature to do that. But it was real. It was absolutely real. And so the next morning I drive out to this young couple's house, Peter and Melinda's, and I want to tell them that I'm a Christian, right? And I've been telling them I was a Christian for about almost a year already, right? And so I told Melinda, I said, Melinda, I'm a Christian. And I told her what had happened, and she looked at me and she said, I don't know, go talk to Peter. she didn't know what to make of it. So I went to Peter and I said, Peter, I'm a Christian, this is what happened. And they wrapped their arms around me, and I said, I don't know anything about Jesus. What should I do? And they said, well, we went to Bible college. Why don't you go to Bible college? I said, yep, okay, I'm going to Bible college. How do I do that? Well, we called up the dean of the Bible college that night and sent me the application form, and that fall, after a summer of stuff, I went to Bible college. And there I just dove into God's Word. I was so excited. And then I got a chance to go down to the inner city of LA for 2 weeks. And so I took that because I wanted to see what Jesus was doing. And 16 years later, I left from the inner city of Watts, having discipled people and taught 4-year-olds on glass-strewn playgrounds and dodged a few bullets and worked in people's lives and had God transform me. And just before I left, we had the Watts riots. And then my story went on to recover from being burnt out in the mission field because I had forgotten about my relationship with Jesus, and it became more duty and responsibility. And at one point in my ministry, I said to God, why should I tell anybody about Jesus? This is just too hard. This is so hard. And so I had to leave the ministry for a while and reconnect with the God who loves me, who is with me, who called me to have a relationship with Him. With Him. Regardless of what I did or didn't do, Jesus loved me and called me. And I had to get back to that. So that's part of my journey, okay? It's part of my journey. So why am I sharing this with you? Because Jesus has a call on each one of our lives to journey with us, because in everyday life, He uses our struggles, our sin, our flaws, to build a powerful story, not just for us, but for those that we tell that story to every day. And it's in the communicating of the story of Jesus and me that God speaks to hearts and transforms lives. Because if he can change my life, sitting in a little church when I'm not even looking for him, he can change anybody's life, right? Anybody's life. And, you know, I'm now the executive pastor at Centerpoint, and I was the chief operating officer of Goodwill of Orange County prior to coming here, right? And very successful. I started as HR person. I was on my way to become a CEO, and that was my goal. And as I commuted back and forth from Murrieta to Santa Ana for the last 5 years, I listened to God from sermons and worship him, and I was a great commuter Christian. I had a loving relationship with the Lord in that car. And I can get in the car today and I go right into devotion mode. It's just there, right? But I wasn't part of a community. I wasn't part of a church because I was exhausted all the time, right? And God put it on my heart to say, how do you want to serve me, Kim? How do you want to serve me? And when I was burning out on the mission field, we took a sabbatical, and I was done. I just couldn't figure out how to keep going, and I was angry with God. I said, God, I don't want to be burnt out. I don't want to be here. You know, didn't you promise to make up the difference? If I did 150%, you'd take care of the rest? And he never did promise that, right? Because it's a partnership. He expects me to think and act and really be a part of this partnership with him in this journey, right? It's not just him telling me what to do and I do it and everything works. It's this partnership. And I remember him asking me at that time, how do you want to serve me? Because I was just telling God, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it, right? Just get it over with. You know, if you want me to go here, I'll die for you. I'll do whatever. I just ticked, right? Just tell me what to do. And all he said was, Kim, how do you want to serve me? And at that point, I had to admit, I didn't. I just didn't. I had nothing left. And I think for men, saying I can't is one of the hardest things that we can face, right? Saying that's not what I need to do. That's not how I'm built. You know, you're built to be a warrior, right? I'm not built to be a warrior, right? I'm just not. So at that time, he asked me that question, and for 15 years after that, I was recovering and struggling to answer that question. Finally, on my commute, as God was ministering to my heart, he asked me that question again. Kim, how do you want to serve me? And I've been reading Billy Graham's book on old age. I can't remember what it was called. All I remember is something about finishing well, right? And he wrote it when he was 94, and he was talking about all this stuff. And he really likes old guys, because now that he's an old guy, he realizes how tough old guys are, right? Because you got to put up with every pain, every elbow thing that doesn't work, every stint you got to put in your heart, every knee replacement you got to do, the hip replacements, the hair loss, all that stuff, right? Tough. Old guys are tough, right? We face things, and but his commitment was, I am going to finish well. I'm going to finish well, no matter how this body lets me down, no matter how many troubles I have in this world. The hardest thing for him was when he realized he couldn't get up from a chair by himself, right? That loss of independence, right? But no matter what, him and Jesus were together, and he knew Jesus was in there, and he was going to finish well. And so I said, well, Lord, I want to finish well. I want to finish well, and that means I need to go back into full-time ministry. I need to go back into full-time ministry. So for me, that's my commitment with Jesus, right? Jesus wasn't telling me, you got to do this. Jesus was asking me a question. You and I are good. We love each other. I'm leading with you. I'm with you. How do you want to serve me? Because we're in this together. This is a journey together, right? And I remember when I was in the ministry, we had this national board, and I was picking up this well-known disciple maker. He made disciples all over America. And I was a young missionary, and I said, I really want to be in the center of God's will, right? I want to make sure I'm right in the dead center of God's will and doing what he wants. And he looked at me and he said, Kim, just obey what you know. Don't worry about all that stuff. Just obey what you know. That's all of life, right? God's going to lead you. He's faithful. He's just. He's merciful. He will get you where he wants you to be. And he'll use everything in your life as a powerful story of his grace and mercy in you for those around you that you touch. Right? Such a powerful statement. Anyway, so let me tell a little bit of my story in terms of how God has done powerful things through me and when. So sometimes we think about, as men, well, I got to be strong, right? God's going to use me if I read my Bible, do my devotions, don't have problems, don't sin, get this area of my life together, he'll use me more, right? But in my experience, the power of God working has always come when I was weakest. So when I first got married, my wife's older than me, and so she had a time clock, and she said, I want to have kids right away. So, that was fun. I wanted to work on having kids too. So, so we were working on it, and it wasn't happening. And so, of course, when that happens, the doctor starts with the guy. And so it takes we get a sample of me, and find that my little guys are going around in circles instead of straight, right? So they were confused, and there was no way they were going to make it to the mark. So the reason was I had an extra grouping of blood vessels in the scrotum that was heating things up too much and making them go a little crazy. So they had to do an operation, and it was a simple operation. They cut up here and they cut the veins, and then it all works, right? Well, for some reason, okay, so I'm 20, 25, 26 at that time. For some reason, I was petrified. I was near dead scared of going in and having that operation, of being put under and having no control of what that doctor does to me. And it was completely, I've never felt that much fear in my life. I've been in the projects, I'd been shot at, I'd seen people shot. I've never been that scared. And so I go to the Word, and I memorize Psalm 34, which talks about those who trust in the Lord, he'll be there with them. Those, full of fear, he'll comfort. It's a powerful, powerful psalm if you're ever in fear, right? So I memorize the psalm, and I'm still full of fear, and but I have to go in. So I go in, and, in operations, they come in and they give you a little vitamin K shot and kind of sedate you a little bit, and then they wheel you down to the surgical ward. And in this hospital, they lined us up about 10 deep, before letting us into surgery. And I was laying there on the gurney next to this woman. And she was probably in her early 50s, right? And she looked like she was in distress. And so I asked her what she was going in for, and she was having a double mastectomy. She had breast cancer, very, very serious, and she was just petrified. I said, can I share a psalm with you that helped me, because I'm really afraid too, right? And so we hold hands, we're all lined up, we're all lined up, kind of dopey. I'm holding hands with this lady and quoting Psalm 34, right? That's the last thing I remember. We get wheeled in. The next day, she comes walking into my room, and she said, I had been so scared, and I had been praying for God's peace and help, and you were there, and you shared that song, and it gave me all the peace that I had been praying for, right? And she went on to support us in the ministry for the next 9 years, and she was completely recovered. and God did a work in her. But the point was, God let me be filled with fear to drive me to the Word, to be able to give this woman a word of encouragement just at that moment, right? I didn't plan it. I couldn't have planned it. I wouldn't have planned it, right? But that's the moment that God used to do a powerful thing. Powerful thing. So think of your lives, right? You guys have stuff you're going through. Most of the men in this room may not even know about it, right? You know your own fears, your own insecurities, the things that drive you to God and make you depend on Him. And I just want to encourage you that those are the things that are powerful in your story as you put your trust in Jesus, that He will use in somebody's life at some point if you just stay open to it. Or even if He just knocks you over the head and says, this is it, right? Don't underestimate or think that God isn't with you just because you're having a trouble or a fear. He is working in every moment of our lives to create that powerful story, right? And He uses the worst of people to do it. He used Paul, who was a murderer, and Samson, who was an adulterer, and David, who was an adulterer, and, He transforms lives and He does things in us for a reason of bringing glory to Himself through the transformation of the lives of others. And it's the everyday stuff, not the big stuff, right? We get to do big stuff once in a while, and that's fun, but it's the everyday life. Okay, I only got a couple minutes, but here, I want to finish with what I think is the most powerful story in the Bible, because it is the most personal interaction between the God of the universe and a human being that I know of. And it's the story of Peter in John, whatever chapter that is, in John. I got it right here. It's when Jesus is talking to John after he rose from the dead. Jesus is talking to Peter after he rose from the dead. And he says to Peter, Peter, do you love me? Now think of this, okay? This is the God of creation, Jesus, the first and the last, through whom and for whom all things are made, right? And He's standing right in front of you, Peter, and He's saying, do you love me? Do you love me with that kind of commitment and devotion, right? That's the type of love He was asking. And Peter said, yes, Lord, I love you as a personal friend and someone who's totally, that filial part. He gives him a command, feed my sheep. And then He says to Peter again, Peter, do you love me with total commitment and devotion? Peter says, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, I do. I love you as a personal friend. And then Jesus uses the same term as Peter, third time. Peter, do you love me as a close personal friend? And Peter was sad because he had asked him 3 times, do you love me? And he says, yes, Lord, you know all things. And then he said, feed my lambs, right? So here's the God of the universe standing before a man, wanting to know and reinstating this man into a love relationship with Him. And then He says, follow me, right? I mean, how much more close and up personal is that? But of course, Peter's like us. And Peter says, because John was following them, and Peter says, Jesus tells him first. He says, and by the way, follow me, and by the way, your life's not going to be that easy. You're going to have some trouble. People are going to put clothes on you and take you where you don't want to go, right? In other words, you're supposed to follow me into a life of trouble, and I'm going to use you to bring glory to me. And so Peter turns around and says, well, Lord, if I'm following you and that's for me, what about him? What kind of life is he going to have? How's he going to suffer? To John. And Jesus says, if I want him to live until I come back, what's that to you? You follow me, right? You follow me. It doesn't matter who's successful, who's not successful, who's handsome, who's not handsome? Sorry, Marty, I didn't mean to point at you. You know, you know, it doesn't matter whether we're rich or poor or whatever. It matters that we are staying in the path and following Jesus for what he's calling us into. Right? That's at the heart of it. It's not the what, it's the who, guys. It's the who. It's Jesus and our relationship with him. And so in my life, you know, this is where God is bringing me. And my story is getting longer every day, thankfully, right? And whether you are my age or older or much younger, the power of your story is what God is wanting to use in bringing glory to him. Whether it's a big, dramatic story or whether it's that everyday story of relationship with him in the quiet moments that you have. Whether anybody else knows what's going on in your life. And so I hope all of you have Jesus. And I hope that each of you will just glory in that relationship and anticipate the wonderful things that God is going to do through even the smallest part of your lives from this point until that final moment of weakness before we pass on and go to be with him. And may every moment be powerful in bringing him glory through our lives. Love you guys. Bless you, each one of you. And may God just have his hand on each one of your lives and give you a great adventure for whatever's ahead of you. Blessings.